I never thought my own voice would become something forbidden inside my own home. I was sitting quietly in the living room, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the hum of conversation in the kitchen. At first, I didn't intend to listen. I had promised myself that day I would keep out of their way, that I would let them speak, let them plan, let them live their lives without inserting myself. But then I heard it. That word, that command. She should just stay silent. It's easier that way. The word silent hit me harder than a slap. It echoed through the walls, through the hallways of the house I once ruled as a matriarch, and landed in my chest like a stone. Silent, as if my thoughts, my feelings, my years of wisdom and sacrifice no longer had value. As if I had been reduced to a body in a chair, breathing but not living, existing but not speaking. Silent. That was the sentence they handed me, and I was expected to obey it without question. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to stand, to march into that kitchen and remind them who I was, what I had done, how many nights I stayed awake nursing fevers, how many meals I had put on the table, how many times I had been their shield when the world outside turned cruel. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone, my voice trapped beneath the weight of years and the sting of betrayal. I sat still, my heart pounding so loudly, I wondered if they could hear it through the walls. Silent. The pain wasn't just in the word, but in the ease with which it was spoken. No hesitation, no shame, just casual cruelty disguised as practicality. She should stay silent, they repeated, as if I wasn't in the next room, as if I couldn't hear, as if I didn't matter at all. My hands trembled in my lap, my nails pressing into the soft flesh of my palms. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, anything to keep myself from crying out, from proving them right by breaking in front of them. And then came the laughter. Quick, sharp, cruel. My daughter's voice, laced with irritation. My son-in-law's chuckle, as though the thought of me speaking was nothing but an inconvenience. That laughter pierced me deeper than the word itself. Because laughter means agreement. Laughter means they shared the belief that my silence was easier than my truth, that my absence was more comfortable than my presence. I sat in that chair, staring at the wall, and for the first time in my life, I felt erased while still alive. Not dead, but erased. A ghost. In my own house. I wondered if this was how it ended, not with illness, not with age, but with silence forced upon me by those I had loved most. If this story already touched you from the beginning, leave a like now so more people can hear it. And subscribe if you want to keep following these stories where truth and dignity always find their way back, even in the darkest of families. My name is Clara. I am 77 years old, and once, my voice was the one everyone listened to. Now, it feels like my voice has been stolen, dismissed, treated as a nuisance. But I know my story is not finished, because silence is not the same as disappearance. Have you ever been told to stay silent when you knew your truth mattered? Tell me in the comments, because stories like these only grow stronger when shared by those who have lived the same pain. My name is Clara. I'm 77 years old, and once I was the woman everyone in this family turned to for advice. My voice carried weight, not because I shouted the loudest, but because I had lived enough life to know which paths were worth walking and which roads led only to regret. I was the compass, the steady hand, the one people came to when storms raged. My kitchen table had been the place of decisions, marriages planned, businesses started, wounds healed. There was a time when no one would dare move forward without first asking me, "What do you think, Clara?" I was not just heard, I was trusted. Back then, strength was not an option, it was a necessity. I built this family side by side with my husband, Daniel. He was the quiet strength and I was the guiding voice. Together we made a life from nothing, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. He worked long hours with his hands rough and calloused, while I kept the home alive, not just with food and order, but with warmth, with rules that taught respect, and with stories that passed down who we were. Our children grew up under a roof where voices were raised not in anger, but in passion, where discussions mattered, and where every person, no matter how young, was encouraged to speak. My husband and I believed silence was never the answer. But everything changes when you lose the one person who always saw you. When Daniel passed away, it was as if half of me vanished with him. For decades, he had been the man who listened without judgment, who gave me the space to be the woman everyone else relied on. His absence left more than grief, it left a vacuum in this family, one that should have been filled with respect for what we had built. Instead, it became the opening for my voice to be dismissed, for my presence to be diminished, for my identity to be chipped away, piece by piece. After his death, my daughter invited me to live with her. At first, I believed it was an act of love. She said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone. Come stay with us. We'll take care of you." I remember packing my things with tears in my eyes, thinking I was entering a new chapter where family closeness would heal the loss. I imagined Sunday dinners with laughter, mornings with shared coffee, evenings filled with memories of Daniel that would keep him alive in our hearts. I thought my voice would still have value, that my experience would still guide, that my presence would still matter, but I was wrong. The shift was subtle at first, so subtle I almost missed it. My advice stopped being asked. My comments at the table went unnoticed. My suggestions were brushed off with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Slowly, the conversations I once led became ones I wasn't even invited to join. And then the silence grew heavier, colder. My voice, once a pillar in this family, became something to be endured, something they wished to erase altogether. I would sit in the corner of the living room, listening as decisions were made without me. Where to spend holidays, how to handle finances, choices about the house I lived in, all spoken as if I were not there at all. When I tried to add a thought, I was interrupted or ignored. "Mom, don't worry about this," my daughter would say, her tone sweet on the surface but edged with impatience. The unspoken message was clear. My voice no longer mattered. The contrast was unbearable. To go from being the voice everyone respected to being the woman they wanted, silenced, felt like erasure, like watching your reflection fade from a mirror, knowing you are still there, but unseen by everyone else. I remembered the years when even neighbors would come for advice, when young couples sought my blessing, when my words had the power to steady trembling hearts. Now, in this house, I was treated as though age had stolen my wisdom, as though grief had stolen my clarity, as though I had nothing left to offer but silence. There is no pain quite like being treated as an inconvenience in the very space you sacrificed everything to create. I was the one who gave birth, who cooked meals, who kept a roof over heads when times were lean. I was the one who believed that if you poured enough love into your children, they would never forget your worth. But here I was, sitting in the shadows, listening to laughter that no longer included me, decisions made as if I were invisible, and whispers suggesting that silence was now my only role. That is when I began to wonder, had my worth expired with my husband's death? Was my voice valuable only when paired with his strength? Or had they always been waiting for the moment to take the authority I once carried and bury it in silence? The questions haunted me, clawed at my chest, left me staring into the night with tears I refused to let them see. Because even in my pain, pride remained. If they wanted silence, I would not give them the satisfaction of tears. But silence does not mean surrender. Deep inside, a flame still burned. A stubborn, relentless flame that whispered, "You are still Clara. You are still the woman who held this family together." And, though they could try to erase me, though they could treat me as invisible, I knew one truth that gave me strength. A story untold is still a story alive, waiting for its moment to be spoken. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. It didn't take long before the whispers became plans, and the plans became decisions made without me. At first, I told myself it was just the natural shift of generations, that maybe my daughter and her husband simply wanted to handle things their own way. But soon, I realized it was not about independence, it was about erasure. They no longer included me in conversations, not even the ones that directly affected me. I would overhear them at night, sitting at the table with papers spread before them, voices low but not low enough. "What are we going to do with her?" Those words made my stomach twist, because they weren't talking about me as a person, they were talking about me as a problem. I listened, from the hallway, frozen in the shadows, as they discussed me as if I were an object in the wrong place, something to be moved, managed, stored away. "She's taking up too much space," my son-in-law muttered. "We need that room for the kids." My daughter sighed, her voice laced with irritation. "I know, but what else can we do? She can't live alone. She can't manage the bills. If we put her in a smaller space, maybe a facility, at least we'd have our privacy back." My chest tightened as though Invisible hands were pressing the air from my lungs. A facility, privacy back. Words that stripped me of humanity and turned me into nothing more than an inconvenience to be handled. The betrayal wasn't just in their plans but in the coldness with which they spoke them. No trace of gratitude, no flicker of recognition for all the years I had held this family together, all the sacrifices made so that my daughter could have opportunities I never dreamed of. It was as if none of it mattered anymore. Age had turned me into excess baggage, and they were trying to figure out where to drop me. I began to notice other things, the documents that went missing from my drawer, the mail I never seemed to receive, the bank statements that were suddenly kept out of sight. My daughter spoke in clipped tones, reassuring me that everything is under control. Under control for whom? Not for me. Control meant silence, and silence meant submission. They wanted me blind, quiet, dependent, grateful for crumbs while they plotted around me. The cruelest part was not even their words, but the silence of the others. My grandchildren, old enough to notice, sat at the table while I was dismissed. They saw when I was interrupted mid-sentence, saw when my ideas were brushed aside, saw when decisions about my own life were made without even glancing in my direction. And yet, they said nothing. Their silence was another betrayal, one that cut even deeper because it meant they had already accepted my invisibility. There is a loneliness unlike any other when you sit surrounded by family and feel like a stranger, like a ghost drifting between their conversations, unseen and unheard. I wanted to scream, to pound the table, to force them to remember who I was. But each time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. I had become afraid of my own voice, afraid that if I used it, they would only mock me more, or worse, remind me again that silence was easier. Day after day, shrank further into myself. I stopped offering advice, I stopped asking questions, I even stopped entering the kitchen when they were gathered there. I learned to live on the edges, in the quiet corners of the house, where I would not be reminded of my erasure. But inside, my thoughts raged. I replayed their words over and over. What are we going to do with her? As if I were not a woman with a name, with a history, with a soul. As if I were nothing more than a burden blocking their path to freedom. There is something devastating about realizing the same people who once ran to you for comfort now see you as disposable. My daughter used to cling to my skirt, beg for my approval, cry in my arms when the world was too heavy. And now she sat in the kitchen with her husband, plotting how to make me disappear from her daily life. The silence of my grandchildren was not innocent either. It was complicity. By saying nothing, by looking down at their plates instead of looking at me, they confirmed what my daughter already believed, that my place in this family had expired. But I am still Clara. I am still the woman who survived poverty, who built a home from nothing, who buried a husband but kept standing. And yet here I was, treated like a fragile object no one wanted to trip over. That tension began to build in me like a storm, pressing against my chest, reminding me that silence is not peace, it is a slow kind of death. Do you believe silence can wound deeper than cruel words? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes what is left unsaid cuts sharper than anything spoken aloud. The moment that sealed my humiliation came on a night that should have been filled with nothing but warmth. We were gathered around the dinner table, plates full, the kind of meal I once used to prepare with love and pride. In the old days, family dinners were sacred. They were a time for laughter, for sharing stories, for reminding each other that we belonged to something greater than ourselves. But that night, the table felt colder than the winter outside. I sat at one end, listening quietly as the conversation moved from work to finances, to plans for the future, plans that seemed to include everyone except me. I tried, gently, to speak. I cleared my throat, waited for a pause, and said, "Have you considered?" But before I could even finish the sentence, my daughter's voice cut sharp across the table. "Mom, please, just stay quiet. You're only confusing things." The words were like glass shattering across the table. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate, but no one rushed to pick it up. The air grew heavy as my daughter's command lingered. "Stay quiet, stay silent." The very same sentence I had overheard before, now delivered to my face in front of everyone. My cheeks burned, not from anger, but from shame. A shame so deep it felt as though my very soul had been dragged out and displayed under a harsh light. Then came the sound that cut deeper than the words themselves, the laughter. My son-in-law smirked, chuckling softly as though silencing me was some private joke. One of the children snickered, trying to cover it with a cough. Even my daughter let out a small laugh, shaking her head as if I were a child caught misbehaving. Each laugh was a nail hammered into the coffin of my dignity, and I sat there, staring at my plate, feeling smaller with every sound. I wanted to vanish. I wanted the floor to open beneath me and swallow me whole, because in that moment, I was no longer Clara, the matriarch, the woman who had carried this family through storms. I was no longer the voice of wisdom or the hand that once steadied theirs. I was a nuisance, a spectacle, something to be laughed at and brushed aside. My identity, once strong and undeniable, was slipping away before my very eyes, replaced by the role they had chosen for me, silence. The food turned to ash in my mouth. My appetite was gone, replaced by a bitter taste of humiliation. I looked around the table, searching for even a single pair of eyes willing to meet mine with kindness, but there was none. They avoided me deliberately, burying themselves in their plates, their conversations, their laughter, anything to avoid the reflection of the cruelty they had just delivered. I sat in that silence, my hands trembling in my lap, and realized that humiliation can sometimes feel worse than loneliness, because loneliness is being unseen, but humiliation is being seen in the cruelest possible way, seen only as weakness, as burden, as something to mock. They stripped me of my place in the family that night, not with violence, not with exile, but with words spoken in front of everyone, and laughter that confirmed them. I excused myself quietly, rising from the table with as much dignity as I could muster, even though my knees wobbled and my throat burned with unshed tears. I walked to my room, each step heavier than the last, and when I closed the door, behind me, I pressed my hand to my chest, to feel my heart still beating, to remind myself that I was still alive, even if they wanted me erased. If you believe no one deserves to be humiliated by their own family, subscribe now for more stories like this. Tell me in the comments, if you had been sitting at that table, watching someone you loved silenced and mocked, would you have stayed quiet or would you have spoken up? After that dinner, something inside me broke in ways I could not easily prepare. I began to withdraw even more, convincing myself that if silence was what they wanted, then silence was what I would give. Days passed where my voice barely left my throat, and the walls of my room became both prison and protection. But while the others moved on, satisfied with my quiet compliance, there was one set of eyes that lingered on me longer than the rest. My youngest grandson, David. He was only 15, still carrying that awkward mix of boyhood and manhood, but there was a sharpness in him, a kind of alertness that made me realize he saw more than he let on. The first time he broke the pattern, it was so small I almost missed it. Late one night, after the house had gone still, I heard a soft knock on my door. For a moment, I hesitated, thinking I had imagined it. Then came the whisper, "Grandma, it's me." I opened the door to see David standing there with a plate in his hands, a sandwich, cut in half, and a glass of milk balanced carefully. "You didn't eat dinner," he said, eyes down, as if embarrassed by his own defiance. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile, whispering thank you as I took the plate. He didn't stay long, just enough to see me take a bite, just enough to make sure I was no longer hungry. Then, he slipped back into the hallway, quiet as a shadow. The next day, it happened again. A different snack, this time an apple, a granola bar, a bottle of water. Always the same knock, always the same hushed tone. It wasn't about the food, it was about the message. I see you, I care. In those moments, a spark of dignity reignited within me. Someone still noticed. Someone still believed I mattered. As days turned to weeks, David's visits grew bolder. He started asking me questions. "Grandma, what was Mom like when she was my age? What did you and Grandpa do when times were hard? What's the biggest lesson you learned in your life?" His curiosity wasn't casual, it was deliberate. He wanted to hear my voice, to give me space to speak, to restore the power they had tried to strip away. Each question he asked was like handing me back a piece of myself, piece by piece. I would sit on the edge of my bed, telling him stories of how his grandfather built our first home with his bare hands, of the winters when we barely had enough food but always found enough laughter to keep warm, of the times when his mother was small and believed I could fix any problem with a hug and a plate of food. David listened with a seriousness beyond his years, his eyes fixed on mine, nodding slowly, absorbing every word as though I were still the authority I once was. For the first time in a long time, I felt respected again. Sometimes he would stay longer, sitting cross-legged on the floor while I knitted. "Tell me another one," he'd say. Or, "What do you think I should do when?" He wasn't just humoring me, he was genuinely asking. And in answering him, I remembered what it felt like to guide, to matter, to be a voice someone valued. It wasn't just that he listened, it was that he made me feel needed again. There were nights he grew frustrated on my behalf. "Why do they treat you like this, Grandma?" he asked once, his voice tight with anger. I had no answer. How could I explain that sometimes love curdles into resentment, that sometimes the very people you raise grow tired of remembering what they owe? Instead, I placed my hand on his and whispered, "Not everyone forgets. You didn't forget." He swallowed hard, and for a moment I saw the man he was becoming, strong, loyal, unwilling to turn his back on someone he loved. These small acts of rebellion, these crumbs of kindness, became my lifeline. They reminded me that even when the world tries to erase you, one person seeing you can be enough to reignite the fire inside. David's presence gave me strength I thought I had lost forever. I stopped hunching my shoulders when I walked into the living room. I started humming softly when I worked with my hands, daring to exist out loud again, because now I knew I wasn't completely alone. What the others didn't realize was that silence had not killed MIT, had prepared me. It made me sharper, more aware, more determined to hold on to my story until the right moment came to release it. And David, with his small acts of defiance and his unwavering eyes, was proof that the truth still had a voice waiting to be spoken. Have you ever been defended by someone when you least expected it? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the smallest act of protection becomes the loudest declaration of love. The moment came on a night that began like all the others, filled with the same dismissive tones and the same cold distance that had become my new reality. I had learned to sit quietly, to fold myself into the background, to pretend that being invisible did not hurt as much as it did. But David, my grandson, had been watching, and I had underestimated just how deeply he had been listening. That night, at the dinner table, he broke the silence that had been suffocating me for so long. The conversation had started with finances. My daughter and her husband were going back and forth about bills, expenses, plans for renovations to the house. My name came up in the middle of it, not as a person but as a cost. "If Mom wasn't here, we'd have more room," my daughter said, her voice flat, almost bored, as if I were nothing more than a line on a spreadsheet. My son-in-law nodded, adding, "We'd save money too. Less utilities, less groceries. It's just practical." I lowered my eyes, the words striking the familiar ache in my chest. I had become accustomed to this kind of language, the constant reminder that I was not seen as family anymore but as an expense, a weight, a problem. But before I could retreat into myself as I usually did, David slammed his hand on the table. The sound was so sharp, so sudden, that the room froze. Everyone stared at him, surprised, because he had always been the quiet one. "You can't silence her," he said, his voice trembling at first, but firming with each word. "She has a voice, and it matters." The air grew heavy. My daughter's fork paused midway to her mouth. My son-in-law's face tightened with irritation. "David, this isn't your place," his mother snapped. But David didn't back down. He turned his gaze directly on her, then on his father, and repeated, louder this time, "You can't silence her." My heart pounded in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my voice being lifted by someone else, carried into the room with a strength I no longer had. I wanted to speak, to thank him, but my throat locked with emotion. All I could do was look at him, my eyes brimming with tears that I refused to let fall. David wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You think I don't hear the things you say? I've recorded them. Every time you talked about her like she was nothing. Every time you laughed at her expense. Every time you planned to send her away like trash. I have it all here." He tapped the screen, and a recording played. My daughter's voice, sharp and cruel. "She doesn't contribute. She's just taking up space." My son-in-law's chuckle followed, casual and cold. "Sooner or later, we'll have to put her in a home. It's better that way." The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter's face flushed red, my son-in-law's jaw clenched, but neither of them spoke. They couldn't. Truth was echoing back at them in their own voices, undeniable, inescapable. David looked around the table, his voice steady now. "Do you know who she is?" Do you remember? This is the woman who raised you, Mom, the woman who built this family, the woman who taught us what respect means. And you sit here treating her like she doesn't matter. Well, she matters to me, and I won't let you erase her." For a long moment, no one moved. I sat there, my breath caught between pride and disbelief. For years I had been silenced, my words dismissed, my presence diminished, and now, through David, my voice was alive again. He was saying everything I had wanted to scream but had swallowed for the sake of peace. He was reminding them, and me, that my life had value, that my history had weight, that my silence did not mean surrender. My daughter finally broke the silence, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and shame. "David, you don't understand," but he cut her off. "I understand enough. I understand that respect is earned, and right now, you don't deserve hers." His words struck the room like a hammer. Even my other grandchildren, who had stayed quiet for so long, looked up with wide eyes. For the first time, someone had cracked the wall of silence that had surrounded me. And in that moment, I felt taller. I felt my spine straighten, my chest expand. My heart beat not with fear but with pride. They had tried to erase me, but my grandson had carved my voice back into the air. They had tried to bury me in silence, but truth had risen louder than their cruelty. If this moment of justice made your heart beat faster, click like so this story can reach even more people. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone so young carry a truth so heavy, and yet speak it with more courage than those who should have known better? After that night, after David's voice filled the room with the strength that mine had been denied for so long, something inside me shifted. It was as if a heavy weight I had carried for years was finally lifted. Not because my circumstances had changed, but because I knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had not been erased. They could laugh at me, dismiss me, call me silent, treat me like a problem, but they could never take away the truth of who I was. And that truth had found a new vessel, a new defender, in the boy who refused to let me disappear. For the first time in years, I sat in my room, not with tears of shame, but with tears of clarity. I looked around at the little things I had left: photographs of Daniel, the ring he had given me on our wedding day, the quilt I had stitched with my own hands when my children were small, the old Bible that had carried my prayers through decades of storms. These were not just objects. They were the story of my life. And I realized something with a calm certainty. All of it, everything I had worked for, everything I had saved, everything that carried even the smallest piece of MIT would not go to the ones who tried to silence me. It would go to the one who gave me back my voice. That night, I began writing. Slowly, with trembling hands, I filled page after page, not just instructions about my will, but stories. Stories David had asked me to tell. Stories he had listened to with wide eyes and steady patience. I wrote them down so that even when I was gone, my voice would remain, etched in ink, impossible to erase. I imagined him reading them one day and knowing that every word was not just history, it was a declaration that his courage had restored my dignity. I found peace in that decision. A deep, quiet peace I had not felt in years. It was not revenge. It was not anger. It was justice. The kind that does not scream but instead settles in the soul like a steady flame. They wanted me silent, but silence became my strength. Silence gave me the space to see who truly valued me, who truly remembered what I had given, who truly understood that respect is not optional, it is earned. In the mornings, I began to walk through the house differently. My steps felt firmer, my head lifted higher. Even when my daughter or her husband avoided my gaze, even when their voices grew sharp with irritation, I no longer bowed under their words, because I knew something they didn't, that the power they thought they had stolen from me was no longer theirs to hold. My story was safe, my truth was alive, and my legacy would belong to the one who proved he could carry it with honor. One evening, David found me writing. He tilted his head curiously and asked, "What are you working on, Grandma?" I smiled and closed the notebook gently. "I'm making sure my story doesn't get lost." He didn't press for more. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes told me he already understood. That boy, who had stood in front of his parents and declared that I mattered, who had risked their anger to protect my dignity, would one day read my words and know that everything I had was his, not just the house, not just the possessions, but the voice that had been denied to me. The decision was silent, but powerful. It gave me back control. It gave me back the part of myself that they thought they had taken forever. And in that silence, I found something stronger than revenge. I found freedom. And you, in my place, would you choose to forgive those who silenced you? Or would you leave everything to the one who made your voice heard? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the answers we give reveal more about who we are than the questions themselves. If stories like this make you reflect on family and justice, subscribe now so you won't miss the next one. They wanted me silent, but truth speaks louder than fear. Life has a way of testing us in silence. There are storms that arrive not with thunder and lightning but with whispers, dismissive glances, and the cruel weight of being ignored by the very people you once carried in your arms. For a long time, I believed that silence was the end of me, that it was proof my voice no longer mattered, that age had stolen not only my strength but also my right to be heard. But I learned something powerful. Silence is not death. Silence is a seed. It waits, it lingers, and when the right moment comes, it blooms louder than any voice that tried to bury it. Faith sustained me when nothing else could. Every night I prayed, not for revenge, not even for change, but for strength to endure and wisdom to see beyond the pain, and those prayers were answered, not in the way I expected, but in the courage of a young boy who carried the truth I had been forced to swallow. My grandson became the echo of my voice, proof that God plants defenders in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the answers we seek don't come through the people we expect, but through the ones willing to stand when everyone else sits down. I realized that dignity cannot be stolen. People can laugh at you, they can silence you, they can strip you of a seat at the table, but they cannot erase the truth of who you are. That truth lives in every sacrifice, in every night you stayed awake for your children, in every wound you healed, in every battle you fought when no one was watching. That truth becomes part of your soul, and no cruelty on this earth can erase it. Forgiveness is not weakness. It does not mean pretending the pain didn't happen. It means refusing to let bitterness define your ending. I chose not to waste my last years chasing apologies that would never come. Instead, I poured my energy into protecting the one who saw me, who reminded me that my story was still alive. My silence became strength because I learned to let go of proving my worth to those blind to it, and instead, to give everything to the one who already knew. Hope, I discovered, is not found in the noise of approval but in the quiet persistence of faith. You can feel forgotten by the world, you can be dismissed by those you loved the most, but if even one person sees you, defends you, believes in you, then you are not erased, you are remembered. And sometimes, that one person is enough to change everything. So let my story remind you, you may be silenced, but you are never voiceless. You may be mocked, but you are never worthless. You may be betrayed, but you are never abandoned. The truth has a way of rising, and when it does, it shakes the very ground beneath those who thought they could bury it. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe now so more people can find strength through these words. And don't miss the next video, where a mother discovers that the people she trusted most were hiding a devastating secret for decades, until the truth came crashing down.